I'm looking at the idea of invocation. Now, if you just look up invocation in a dictionary, you'll find it can mean several things. One is sort of, they will say, evoking a demon or a spirit, so bringing it up into consciousness, but also bringing down some higher power. And magicians tend to make a distinction between the two. And so invocation tends to be a bringing down of some higher thing, which could be a god, like, invoking Aphrodite or Jove, or it could be a spirit, like a patriot invoking the spirit of Albion, his country, in order to do something magnificent. Or it could be a power, like invoking justice or truth or whatever. Now, what is similar about those things? You could say they're all forms of invoking an egregore in the sort of meaning which I gave when I talked about, there's a talk I gave on egregores, this sort of abstract quality which can be made of material things, like the people of Britain is an egregore, which is something quite other than just a collection of individuals. It is a sort of a wholeness. So invocation, as used magically, is a bringing down this egregore and sort of realizing it maybe in oneself or in the immediate locality. And there's a sort of, I think it's a very strong analogy actually. It works very well to think of it as downloading from the cloud, almost literally in some cases. And what I want to talk about, there's a formula which is common to a lot of invocations, and it's a 3-2-1 formula. Now, I'm not saying it's universal, because I remember reading Crowley on some Egyptian rituals, and I think he saw them as 5 parts of the ritual. But if you study a lot of ancient rituals of invocation, you'll find that you can usually fit them quite well into this sort of 3-2-1 formula. So this is what I wanted to explain. It goes like this. You begin by talking about the thing you want to invoke in the third person. This is really describing it in factual terms. For instance, and then you address it in the second person, you, and you're being passionate and putting your emotion into addressing this deity or thing. And then you speak in the first person, I am this thing, whatever. You identify with it. So first you describe, then you address, and then you identify with it. And so, for example, let's say the god Jupiter, whatever he means in whatever pantheon you're working with. You would begin by describing Jupiter as best you can. Read up all the facts about Jupiter, all the traditions, and say, he is the mighty king of Olympus, the ruler of the gods. He rides the clouds. He's the one who brings rain and fecundates the earth, so he's a great giver. He's also the one who brings storms and thunder and can strike you down with lightning and so on and so on. Describe as best you can and go on and on. So when do you stop? Well, basically, when you run out of stuff to say, when you find you're repeating yourself, then you've done your best to totally describe the thing you're invoking. Then you speak in the second person. O thou who is the mighty one that rides the clouds and brings down rain and plenty upon the people, O thou who strikes us with the thunder, purple robe one, blah, 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 that sort of thing. Really pouring out your feeling into this entity, this thing, this egregore. And then again, when you sort of absolutely exhaust yourself in that and you find you're just repeating yourself, there's nothing more to say, you then become that thing. I am he, the Lord of Olympus. I am the mighty one, blah, 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 blah. And you're both surrendering yourself, your ego, if you like, and filling yourself with this power, becoming it best you can. And what is the criteria now? It's not so much when you find you're repeating yourself as when you really feel filled, identified with what you are invoking. So that's it basically. At each stage you sort of go to exhaustion or repetition. And the end, it is when you really feel you are becoming this quality. And then what you do with it depends on what sort of magic you're doing. Now, not everyone is going to go in for bell, book and candle and do this sort of thing. So an interesting exercise which uses this principle was called, I think it's called the 3-2-1 exercise. And I came across it once when I went to a very sort of New Agey festival with a lot of workshops and things going on. And one of the workshops was the 3-2-1 principle. And they were using it for a specific reason. It was how to handle things that make you too angry. Now, I say too angry because I suppose with Sun in Aries, I'm not against anger in general as a principle. It can be very energizing. It can be the thing that gets you off your backside, makes things happen. But too angry is when you find that you're obsessing in your anger. Say, very often it's about a type of person. So let's say you have an absolute aversion to bullying people. And there you are starting the day in your office and someone comes in and is clearly being a bully. And it makes you so angry, but he's a boss, you see, so you can't actually say anything. Now, that's fair enough to be angry, but if you spend all the rest of your day fuming, spending all your time thinking up terrible things you would like to do to the bastard, but you're not actually getting work done, this is clearly not productive. So what does one do when you have these real hate figures in you, which can become an obsession? You can waste your energy, burn you up from inside. And they recommended what they call the 3-2-1 method. And basically it is an invocation. And you do it with pencil and paper. So it's worth thinking, what are the sort of people, figures or things which can get you so upset as to actually make you ineffective? Now, I won't give away what I chose. That's too personal. But I have heard people ranting against arrogant, smart intellectuals, raging about them and, identifying people and saying, he's one of those bastards. He thinks he knows everything, blah, blah, blah. So let's just take that as an example. You take a pad of paper, because you may need several sheets, and a pencil, and you begin describing the sort of person that you hate. He or she, let's take a he. He's someone, probably got rich parents who went to the best university and chose really snobbish subjects, nothing useful because he knew he'd never have to work, chose things like classical philosophy or I don't know, so sort of studies things that he could show off for knowing about, learning Greek and things like that, and study classics. And so he uses that to put down other people, always bringing up with a smart quote from Plato or something like that, to make other people feel stupid, and so on and so forth. And he'll dress up in a sort of trendy but minimalist way, and he'll wear clothes by so and so and so. I could just see him now. He uses this, that, the other perfume. Oh, he'll have a car which is he'll have a Tesla, something very smart but very woke and okay. And oh yes, he's as woke as hell. He does this, that, the other. Go on and on and on and on and on. Do you really conjured up this person that makes you feel sick? And you've exhausted yourself writing that up. Then you put aside those pages and start with a blank sheet, and now speak in the second person. I hate you. You're arrogant. You put me down with you're always quoting Latin things at the other. You think you're so smart having a Tesla and I don't know, being vegetarian or whatever. You go on and on and on. Smart ass you, and you're always saying how you're not harming the environment and how I am and things like that. Blah 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 blah. Go on until you have exhausted your rage in this person. And you put aside the paper. And now you take a fresh sheet of paper and you start writing as that person who you can now feel inside yourself. You know him so well by now because you've described him, you've shouted at him, and you know him so well you can now write for that person. And this, to me, is where it becomes interesting, because the voice that comes out as you write is not necessarily as horrible as you have described. And I found this very interesting and rather healing. The voice may begin like this. Yes, I did go to Harvard. And it was because my parents were rich and they were able to give me the very best education to get there and to pull the right strings with the right contacts, things like that. Yeah, you're right. But the reason I chose classical philosophy was not because I wanted to show off and put other people down. It's because I really found it interesting. And I do like to quote Plato and that in conversations and bring it up, because I feel that I have learnt things which really are interesting and can be useful. I really feel I have something to offer from my education. And it's very upsetting for me when people turn away and say, oh, you're just being clever, things like that. Maybe I am being clever, but I am actually think that I have learned something which I can share with other people, and so on. As I say, it's very interesting because, you have invoked this monster, but I found when I got to that third part, I really was seeing this figure, I really was experiencing this figure in a very different way, in a way that was quite healing. And that actually was the object of the exercise. The person you love to hate, the figure which has you grinding your teeth and wasting hours trying to think of snide things to put onto web pages and to put onto social media and everything. That person who's been wasting so much of your time actually is a part of yourself which you could say you've been repressing or in denial or whatever. And you're beginning a dialogue which can be quite a healing dialogue. And that was how this was presented at this workshop, as a way of doing that. And it was very interesting to me because in a sense it was practice of an invocation. There you are bringing down this ghastly out there figure which you see everywhere in your enemies, things like that, bringing down and realizing it in yourself and sort of healing your relationship with it. So that is a sort of a practical example of 3-2-1 invocation, even if you're not going to go the whole hog and bell, book and candle and do a formal invocation of a deity. Now it's interesting, why did I want to give a talk about invocation? It actually followed from the last talk I gave, which was about treating groups of people as an information processor, if you like. The way that you can insert ideas or opinions into a group of people to see what happens, where it takes them, if you like. And this was very much the process used by people like marketing people and advertising people. And I gave examples of companies which you pay them a fortune and they will come up with a slogan or an advert or something which is designed to have a certain effect. Now, it's not a thing that works on an individual level. Show someone an advertisement, what was it? Coca-Cola, it's the real thing. Well, how many people who see that and say, oh, wow, it's the real thing, I must have a Coca-Cola? Nobody. But if that is presented to a population, Coca-Cola, it's the real thing, with sort of suitable images of bright young people looking trendy and smooth and cool, it does contribute to greater sales. So that's what I mean by information process. It's just the populace as an egregore. Any one individual might just laugh that off as being stupid, but the population as a whole can be slightly pushed in a certain direction. And of course, what is sinister about that is when it is used, and I gave examples of that, to try to say sway the vote or cause a population to take a particular direction, like Brexit or whatever. And I gave a specific example of the type of thinking that I've had to do as working for marketing companies. And I gave example of something I recently had to do as to a brochure, I think it was a brochure, for addressing chief information officers in companies to try to persuade them to use some particular service or product. And what I did is I looked at the sort of final words of that brochure as if I was this archetypal chief information officer. And I showed how I begin by thinking of this information officer as a very busy person who doesn't actually have time to read all this garbage. He picks up the brochure, looks at it, and before he throws it in the waste basket, he just looks at the conclusion. What's the last paragraph say? And it was something like, this may seem all very complicated, but in essence, it boils down to one simple principle: success. And I thought, if that's the only thing he reads, that might make him think, well, I'll look at the earlier bits, I'll read the rest of it to see what takes me to there. And so I was actually doing the third part of that invocation. I was identifying with the thing I was invoking in order to read this and to see what adjustments I had to make it more attractive. Now, what was interesting about that is actually, if I look back over the whole process of writing a brochure like that or an article, very often it takes that 3-2-1 formula. Now, if you look at a lot of these sort of rather tiresome articles, which I typically had to ghostwrite in trade magazines, so often they begin with that third person thing. And I think they do it very badly. I've seen so many articles which begin, in today's technology-driven world, there's ever greater pressure for businesses to compete, to have to catch up with new things, blah, 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 blah. Now, that isn't very good for me because it's far too general. It's the same thing that's been said ever since the mid-80s when PCs first began appearing on desks. today's businesses are driven by technology, the competition is getting fiercer, blah, blah, blah. It just keeps on, same old bashing away at the same old stuff. So when I was writing this piece for CIOs, I actually read up a bit about what are the changes in CIOs' lives. And I began more on the lines of today's CIO is doing a very different job than just a few years ago. Because digital transformation has become such a key thing in modern business, it means the CIO is no longer just someone who meets the demands of other departments of what they need. Instead, he's actually part of the decision-making process. He is amongst the decision makers right at the top of the organization because he knows what transformation can happen and advises of how it's best done. Which means he has to know about the whole company it's working. He has to understand the issues, the political and marketing pressures out there in order to keep ahead. I managed to boil it down to a short paragraph, but basically I was describing the sort of people I wanted to address. And then in the main part of the brochure or the article, you say, how do you manage it now with so much on your plate? Of how are you going to be able to keep your fingers on the controls or whatever like that? How would it be if you had one simple dashboard, which could call up, you could design it yourself, but it would call up all the key facts of what is happening in the company, what are the outside pressures, blah, 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 blah. I would describe the solution that this company is offering, but by saying, how would you feel if you had this? You know, what would you want to add to it as you have the control over this thing and so on? And then it's when I got to the end, I would then do that third person thing I was talking about. I would, as it were, become the CIO I'm addressing and read through what I've done as if I was that person, and I would think that sentence is too long, this bit's too vague, and I would then edit it as if I was that third person that I'm actually, no, as if I was that third person, the CIO, and just tuning it to make me feel happy with it. So that was what made me want to talk about Invocation. The fact that I'd sort of shown the final stage of it without realizing. I thought about it. I thought, let's just describe the 3-2-1 formula because I think it's a very useful idea. Now, at the beginning, I said that people use the word invocation in dictionaries that in a more general way, calling up as well as calling down. Whereas in magic, we tend to use invocation as the big thing you're bringing down to here rather than the thing you're calling up from the depths. I'm going to talk about that, I think, in a separate thing because it's both very important distinction in practical working, but also I'll argue that in another sense it's not at all important. And that's quite an interesting point. So that I'm going to do in another talk following this one.